Barrister Adebayo stood in front of the mirror to tie his tie and titivate himself before going out for his meetings. He remembered the new iPhone he bought for their only daughter, who did well in her last exam. "Have you given her the phone?" he questioned his wife, Mrs. Adebayo, who lay on the bed, scrolling through her phone. "Darling," he called her several times before she responded to his calls. "Are you talking to me?" Mrs. Adebayo responded in oblivion to her husband's inquiry. "Yes, I am talking to you about our daughter," he reacted with irritation over her absence in their conversation. "I'm sorry, dear. I am engrossed with the new stock I am getting for my shop," she replied calmly. "You better be sorry. You need to be more present in her life," he pleaded with her. Sorry, my darling," she said and stood up to give her husband a peck on his cheek. "What are you saying about our daughter, Yemesi?" she asked her husband politely. Barrister Adebayo, who had been pacified by her kiss, responded gently, "I was only asking if you have given our daughter the gift." "You mean the iPhone?" "I will give it to her before I leave," she responded before she seated herself back on the bed. "You mean you are going to give it to her just like that?" he asked with a concerned demeanor. "Yes, I will give it to her, or do you want me to throw a party before giving it to her?" she asked. "Of course not, don't be ridiculous. I only want you to help in onboarding her on the phone," he retorted. "Darling, it's just a phone, there is no big deal about it," she replied nonchalantly. "There is a big deal about it because you need to supervise and customize the apps that she will put on that phone," he elucidated. They argued for a while on the subject. Mr. Adebayo made it known to his wife that their child, who was just 14 years old, didn't have the capacity to process things properly, especially what she would be exposed to on social media through her phone. But Mrs. Adebayo was adamant on the subject. She pointed out that she was as busy as her husband. Considering the economic situation of the country, she would not be in the best position to supervise their daughter's social media activities. When Barrister Adebayo left for his appointment, Mrs. Adebayo handed the phone to her daughter as she promised, but didn't help in setting up the phone for her daughter's good use. At school the next day, Yemesi showed off her phone to her friend Agnes in the presence of other girls in class. "Wow! This is nice, it must have cost a fortune," Agnes exclaimed in admiration of her new phone. They both played with the phone for a while. At the close of school, Yemesi was approached by two girls of the same age range. They labeled themselves the big girls of the class because of their parents' affluence and their habit of showing off in class. "Hey girl, I saw your new iPhone. Your parents must be rich. Would you like to join our clique?" Mabel, one of the ginger girls, approached Yemesi. "Yes, I will join your group." "We all want to join the ginger girls," Yemesi exclaimed in excitement. "I hope you know our clique is for the selected few, the rich and classy. We roll in so much ginger and glamour. In this senior class, no one does it like us," Vicky spoke with pride, and she touched her friend, Mabel, in an amusing manner. After the introduction, Mabel snapped her fingers to get Yemesi's attention. "Now let me see your phone." Yemesi gave her the phone without contesting. "You don't have the PAL app on your phone." "What is the PAL app?" Yemesi queried Mabel's statement in naivety. "That is the app that happening girls install on their phone. We get all the trendy updates around us on the app," Mabel elucidated, and Yemesi retorted, "Just install it for me." "Good girl, you are blending in already," Vicky said as she saw Mabel installing the app for Yemesi. The three girls walked down to the school bus together, in each other's company. They also entered and sat close to each other in the bus. Agnes, who used to be Yemesi's friend, sat afar from them, neglected because she couldn't fit into their social circle. "So, you want me to leave my business when you can't afford the usual luxurious things in life again?" Mrs. Adebayo flared up in conversation with her husband. "Now you are rubbing it in my face. I am trying my best for the family. That is why I am taking more jobs outside my jurisdiction. The economy is not smiling now," Barrister Adebayo exploded. He paced around for some time in rage before he continued talking. "I only wanted you to monitor our daughter on social media. There is a lot going on out there now. What is going on out there? Is she the only girl on social media? Mrs. Adebayo continued her rebellion towards her husband. She is a child in the grooming stage. She does not have much experience in life to process things properly, so we cannot leave her out there on social media by herself. Mr. Adebayo clarified himself on the issue, but Mrs. Adebayo refused to listen. She only wanted to air her own view on the matter. You can also take my place. A man can also stay at home to care for their children. As for me, I must make this money to take care of myself. She contradicted her husband's opinion. Remember, she is a girl child. You are in the best position to guide her. He continued to make her see reason, but Mrs. Adebayo continued to thwart his effort. She believed a girl child is also a father's child. Mr. Adebayo tried to continue the conversation, but he stopped when he saw their daughter arriving from school. "Good day, Mommy." "Good day, Daddy." Yemesi greeted both of her parents. They greeted her back with attitude, one after the other. Yemesi sensed the tension between her parents, and she quickly left their presence to be by herself. She wondered what was going on in her parents' lives because they didn't have time for her anymore. Not too long ago, they used to have a lot of family time. They would start the day with morning devotion, they would have breakfast, dinner, and even lunch together. Mrs. Adebayo used to be at home running her business and be at her daughter's beck and call. Mr. Adebayo provided for all their needs, putting her in the best school and buying expensive things for her and her mother. Since the economic crunch, everything changed. Mr. Adebayo's income dwindled. He used to have a lot of paying clients in his legal profession, both corporate and individual. The individual clients became chronic debtors, and the corporate clients liquidated. He had to diversify from his legal specialty, corporate law. He took a class with Bripan and learned about insolvency and recovery practice, just to help his clients and pay his bills. Mr. Adebayo's side hustle came with a price. His family had to suffer his inattention. He worked more hours to the negligence of his family. He also had to rationalize his income to cater for longer periods of their livelihood, to the detriment of his wife's expensive lifestyle. Mrs. Adebayo went from being a home businesswoman to a woman who ran a beauty shop in Lekki. And she stopped caring about her daughter or her well-being, and their family time was over. Yemesi was used to staying alone. The only company she had was her phone. The euphoria of having a new app gripped her. After lunch, she retired to her room and launched the PAL app on her phone. She inputted her personal information on the platform, mostly inaccurate information, just to get on with the registration. After the registration, she was live on the platform. The algorithm showed her content like funny skits at first. Later, it showed things about her gender and then extreme things about her gender. One of the content creators she was fascinated by was female mentor. She was known for using vulgar language on the platform, words like bola, pickers, yansh, cucumber, and such. Yemesi, who was an age butter by birth, was thrilled by her content. She made her a role model. The first time Yemesi saw her menstrual cycle, she was scared. She woke up to see her panties wet with blood stains. She ran to her mother for help, but she ignored her for a potential client at her shop. Yemesi went back to her room still scared to her bone marrow because she was not sure what to do with her wet panties. She remembered the content she watched on the PAL app from Female Mentor about when a woman sees the red flag for the first time. In Female Mentor's words, when you see that red thing, you go wash yourself very well in the bathroom. Then go to the nearby supermarket or aboki, anyone you see, get a sanitary pad and go back home to put it in all those areas. Check the link of a video in my bio on how to put the pad for your private area. After you done fix yourself, go in front of the mirror, look yourself for the mirror, and say, I am a woman and I done dey ready to chop banana. Yemesi followed Female Mentor's instructions. After she cleaned herself up, she stood in front of the mirror in the room and said, I am a woman and I done dey ready to chop banana. She filled herself up with self-fulfillment. At school, as the teacher was teaching, Yemesi was distracted. She was looking at Banji, one of the boys in her class, whom she had been admiring from afar. She felt he was cute and intelligent, plus he had the swag that she was looking for in a man. She just sat in class, daydreaming about what she could do with him behind closed doors. You guys should not forget to do your assignments on the app, Activity 7, the teacher said and concluded the class. Agnes, who had been observing Yemesi during the class, came from her seat and pinched Yemesi on the back. I noticed you were staring at him throughout the class, Agnes said and sat on her desk. She continued talking, ever since you joined those girls, your attitude has changed. What is your own there? I can't remember soliciting for your advice, Yemesi countered her. I will only advise you to take your academics seriously. You seem distracted with your new phone and those busybody friends of yours lately, Agnes advised her, but Yemesi took it the wrong way. You are jealous of me, jealous of my big phone and my association with the ginger girls, Yemesi said. Immediately she concluded her speech, Agnes stood from her desk and gave her a piece of her mind. You think I don't have a big gadget like yours? I have an iPad at home that I use for my assignments. My parents do not want me to be distracted by it, so they programmed my routines. I have screen time when I use my iPad to do school assignments and watch educational programs on YouTube. She paused and continued her statement, unlike you and your stupid girls without future ambition. If you will excuse me. She concluded and left Yemesi's presence, infuriated. Yemesi stood up from her seat and talked back as she left her. You are only jealous, stupid girl. She walked down to the back of the class, where the ginger girls were hanging out. This your two oranges don't they bigo, who they enjoy? Mabel said as she touched Vicky's breast. Vicky giggled before she also talked about her womanly features. You too NKO and your big yansh. I am sure AO is maintaining it well, she replied to her, and they continued to joke about their sexuality without shaming class. Then Yemesi arrived in their midst. What are you girls talking about? Yemesi queried with naivety, but they did not answer her question. Instead, they questioned her celibacy status. Come to think of it, Yemesi, you are the only one without a boyfriend among us, Vicky made her assertion known to her. Yemesi was speechless, but deep down, she wanted a boy in her life, a boy like Banji. They asked if she wanted any guy in the class, and she pointed to Banji. They immediately dragged her towards Banji because they knew him, they lived in the same neighborhood. Mabel whispered into Banji's ear, and they both chuckled before they left him with Yemesi. I think I love you also, Banji made his affection known to Yemesi moments after the ginger girls left them. Yemesi was shy and didn't know what to say because it was the first time a guy had spoken to her about love. She mumbled, I think. Before she completed her words, Banji ushed her and spoke in self-gratification. You don't have to say it, everyone knows I am a good-looking guy. I have told your friend to invite you to my birthday on Saturday so that I can get to know you better. Yemesi, who was quiet throughout their conversation, only managed to say goodbye when Banji ended the conversation. She was mesmerized to be in his presence. As Yemesi turned to meet her friends, she met the angry gaze of Deborah, who had watched Yemesi talk to Banji from afar. Deborah looked at Yemesi, eyeball to eyeball, and asked her to stay away from her guy. Yemesi was irritated by Deborah's warning. She froze for a few seconds to gather herself before she proceeded to meet her friends. After dinner a few days later, Mrs. Adebayo stood from the dining table and instructed her daughter to clear the table and wash the dishes after she and her husband were done with their meal. Yemesi nodded in obedience to her mother. As Mrs. Adebayo turned to go to her room, Yemesi discovered her mother was stained. She spoke about it in a language that enraged her mother. Mom, your yansh is stained, I think your period has come, she said tersely and continued with her meal. Mrs. Adebayo, who was surprised and livid at the same time over her daughter's choice of words, wondered when she started speaking in vulgar language. Where did you get that from? She queried her daughter, but Yemesi was at a loss for words. Will you get out of my sight now before I smack you for being vulgar in my house? She snapped at her, and Yemesi ran to her room to escape her mother's wrath. It was from there she heard her father telling her mother to do better with her. Mr. Adebayo made it known to her mom that her distance from their daughter had made her cultivate bad habits, like the vulgarity she just exhibited. He advised her that as a mother, she should get close to their daughter, counsel her, so that she could get to know about her desires. As usual, an argument ensued because her mother didn't take his advice. The noise of their disagreement made Yemesi cover her ears with a pillow in her room before she finally dozed off. The driver dropped Yemesi at Banji's place for his birthday. Yemesi walked into the party arena, looking gorgeous after using her mom's makeup without her consent, in preparation for the party. She greeted her friends, the Ginger Girls. The Ginger Girls were in the company of their boyfriends, as were other girls at the party. They were sipping drinks from their cups and dancing to the song on the stereo. Yemesi was all alone before Banji approached her. "I checked you up on the Pal app, your followers are minimal," Banji said to Yemesi, who was immediately excited by his presence. "I am just new on social media." Banji chuckled in response to her before he finally remarked sarcastically, "I guess you must be a daddy's or mommy's girl then. My social media followers may be minimal, but I am not a small girl. I know everything about being a big girl," she refuted Banji's statement. "So, what do you know about being a big girl?" Banji queried. Yemesi walked in front of him and twerked for him, just like she saw female mentor do in front of the camera. Banji had to swallow his words after seeing Yemesi's seductive display. He mumbled, "I think it would be better if you showed me all these big girl things in my room." "Sure." Yemesi agreed to Banji's request immediately, without a second thought, as if she had been expecting such a request from him. They both disappeared from the party into Banji's room for some minutes, doing adult things. Yemesi and Banji reappeared at the party with excitement. "Happy birthday, Banji. Sorry I did not get you a birthday present." Yemesi had to be loud to make herself audible to Banji. The party had gone wild, with noisy music and provocative dancing from the girls. "You have already given me the best birthday gift," Banji answered her with fulfillment in his voice. Yemesi was still in Banji's company when Deborah accosted her. "Haven't I warned you to stay away from him?" Yemesi ignored her at first until Banji was taken away by a guy who needed his attention. Yemesi walked away from Deborah, who continued to abuse her. Yemesi, who didn't want to grieve for anybody, like her mentor, female mentor, used to say, slapped Deborah not once but multiple times. Yemesi's aggression was all over social media in no time because it was covered on phones by the party attendees. It was tagged as bullying all over the Pal app. Yemesi trended all over social media and around the country as a bully. "Why did you hit her? When did you start misbehaving?" Mr. Adebayo was very disappointed in his daughter after she was suspended. He continued to press her for answers. Yemesi used to be well behaved, both in school and at home. "I'm sorry, Dad. I am really sorry. I think social media happened to me, female mentor happened to me." Yemesi continued to apologize to her dad. Mr. Adebayo wanted to reprimand her father before Mrs. Adebayo rushed inside their daughter's room with her phone. "Oh, I hope my daughter will be admitted back to school because she has been blacklisted all over social media, especially on the Pal app," Mrs. Adebayo said, looking very worried. "You should be blamed for this issue. I have told you to guide her on the use of the phone, but you will always fight me. Now the deed has been done." Mr. Adebayo pinned all the blame on his wife. Mrs. Adebayo slumped on the bed, with dejection etched on her face. "They can eat their cake and have it. They can continue to defame my daughter on their platform, when they are the source of our daughter's waywardness, by exposing her to toxic contents through their algorithm," Mr. Adebayo asserted. Mrs. Adebayo asked her husband about who he was talking about because she was lost in her husband's words. "The Pal app management will be sued for exposing my daughter to toxic content through their algorithms and enabling defamatory content about their daughter on their platform," Mr. Adebayo elucidated before leaving their daughter's room. After long proceedings that lasted for a few months, the defendant, the Pal app owner, through their lawyer, were able to prove to the court they cannot be liable for what is posted on their platform, especially when it involves public opinion about an incident. They also proved that the algorithm automates content to individuals according to the data inputted by them during registration. The algorithm can only push data according to individual age, gender, and preferences. They also made it clear that filters and features can be enabled on their platform to ensure that adult content does not get to teenagers. The judge gave her verdict acquitting the defendant of any liability. I, therefore, declare the defendant not liable after considering all evidence presented by them. I will only implore they should provide an additional layer of verification of age, in the form of government's authorized documents, to prevent the algorithm from automating adult content to underage. I advise the parents should do more in monitoring their child's activities on social media. There are apps that can be put in place for such tasks in these dispensations. In an era where social media is an impediment to child education, where a lot of children forfeited excelling in their educational pursuit over social media popularity, it is really disturbing. Parents should do better in addressing the disturbing trend that could affect the future of their children. Parents should be actively involved in the onboarding of apps on their children's phone and guide them in the use of their devices. They should apply filters and restrictions as controls to prevent them from unruly content creators, as we will also do our part as an institution. May God help our children to achieve their long lives goals, she said and rose.
Do you mind? She asked tersely. She was carrying a tray filled with edible things, snacks and drink. I looked around the cafeteria, saw students eating out, having a chit-chat. I could still see some vacant tables. I wondered why she wanted to share my table with me. Of course, it is a free world, I replied absent-mindedly. Thank you, you are welcome, ensued between us as she sat down on the adjoining seat. I had barely scooped a spoonful from my meal, fried rice, when she asked if I knew her. It was then I looked straight into her eyes to see if I could recognize her. I realized I knew her, perhaps not so well. I was the girl that almost fell off the bridge because of my hiatus in words, she tried to explain, but I retorted before she did. Earlier that day, I had met her. It was rainy and the pathway to our lecture theater had been flooded. Students had already made an artificial bridge over the waters, from bricks and timber planks. We were taking turns to cross when she missed her steps and almost fell off the makeshift bridge, but I held her, because I was right behind her. She was excessively embarrassed to utter a word of gratitude, but the relief on her face conveyed the message, albeit unorthodoxly. Thank you for this morning, she uttered pleasantly. It's a pleasure, I replied smiling. We ate our meals in silence after then. The waiter later brought my bill. I was still looking into my wallet, when she paid hurriedly and said, "The bill is on me." I thanked her, she was flattered. One good turn deserves another, she uttered gesticulating. We left the cafeteria that day. That was how I met Fonmileo Man. Fonmileo and I were in the same faculty, but not in the same department. She majored in banking and finance, while I was studying financial accounting. She was a swarthy petite girl, very humble and kind. We seldom saw each other in class, because our lecture days were different, and we weren't intimate at that time. At a particular period in class, she accused me of not asking after her, for she had been sick. I sympathized with her and asked if it was malaria, but she told me it was way beyond malaria. I didn't query more for details, I just kept comforting her. Our relationship became more cordial, because we attended the same fellowship on campus. I became a regular caller at her place. In one of such visits, I found out she was an SS. It was shocking and grieving. I met her in serious pain, to and forth. She rolled on her bed, she sobbed in excruciating pain. Maria, her roommate, was soothing her with warm water. She was also trying to call up her parents. I joined in pacifying her. We later hired a bus, which took her home, in Victoria Island. Tommy played a prominent role in my life. Financially, when I had money issues, and psychologically, when that turned away from my life. He got a second wife and moved out with her, leaving mom and me to wallow in poverty. Tommy would always encourage me that things would get better. She also helped out in my studies, especially in project analysis. I had a C grade with her help. Tommy was a rare jewel. I couldn't just toss her away from my life. We stuck together in turbulent times. An instance of that was when a crisis broke out in our university. Indigenes were at loggerheads with students. Students were at the palace, on a peaceful protest, over the spate of insecurity in the community. Local vigilante had unalived a second-year student. King didn't grant the students an audience, he later fired pew-pew shots at them, to scare them away. 2 students didn't make it in the process, and students set the palace ablaze out of annoyance. Indigenes revolted in vengeance, lives were ruined. We were within an inch of death in the midst of the communal battle, but we escaped luckily. Fumi and I spent a night out in the woods. I took her home safely the next day. That was my first time at the man's residence. Parents were relieved to see us. They had been worried, since they heard about the crisis, over the radio, but couldn't reach Fumi, because her phone was switched off. They were full of gratitude to me, for bringing back their only child. They also implored me, to come often, as their doors will always be open to me. Our relationship was platonic. I saw her as my sister, but she wanted something more serious. Anytime she saw me with other girls, she was always jealous. I was in my room one day, entertaining a female friend of mine, Hannah. We sat down on my bed. Since I had no chair in my room, we were watching a movie. She later lay comfortably beside me, so that she could get a better view of the movie. It was then Fumi walked in. I was about to introduce both of them to each other, when Fumi hissed and walked away. I was puzzled at her reaction. I visited Fumi later that evening. She was lying on the bed, facing the wall. I moved closer and sat beside her on the bed. Fumi, I called and laid my hand on her shoulder. She adjusted and wiped her face with her palm, before she finally turned over. I could see her face damped with tears. She had been sobbing, certainly. "What is wrong?" I queried. Seeing her in that mood, I felt concerned. "Why can't you love me?" she uttered soberly. I stared straight into her whitish pupils lovingly. A strand of compassion gripped me. She was the only woman in my life and I did love her. But love was delicate for her. A love has a way of torturing us and I didn't want her to be hurt. "Of course, I do love you." I lifted her up from the bed, I took her into my arms, and we hugged passionately. We later lay on the bed, side by side, long into the night. Sometime in November 2022, I got a tragic text from Fumi. Her mom had died in the hospital. She told me once her mom had breast cancer, which eventually led to her death. Reminiscences of her lifetime roamed in my mind. I remembered when she caught Fumi and me loving up, she smiled and warned us to play it safe. The school fees scenario was unforgettable. Mom had no money to pay for my school fees. She was the one that paid when she had me lamenting to Fumileo. All was just like yesterday. She was gone too soon. From the depth of my heart, I felt death had been cruel to take her away. Damn death and its wickedness. When I arrived finally at Fumi's place, she was already devastated. She wept greatly. It was an enormous loss for her, for nothing in the world can be quantified with motherly love. Miriam and I were pacifying her, when Mr. Man arrived from the hospital. He was silent all through. He was still shocked by the death of his wife. There was nothing anyone could do. Death is an inevitable price we all have to pay. Fumi weathered the storm well, but there was a major setback in her life. Her health continuously deteriorated. She really missed her mother's care. She would fall sick 2 to 3 times in a month. Miriam was a true friend. She cared for her every time, since they lived in the same vicinity in Victoria Island. However, Miriam had to leave for youth service later that year, leaving her at the mercy of no one. Someone like me was always there when Fumi's father had gone for a business trip. Fumi's father dealt in oil. There was a serious opening in the oil sector internationally, so he hardly stayed in Nigeria. While he was away, I was always caring for Fumi. He would only have to send money when it was necessary. Along the line, Mr. Man remarried. He felt I had my life to live and it was necessary for me to have motherly care again. Fumi's stepmother was worse than the devil. He constantly maltreated her when he was gone. She attended a cherubim and seraphim church. She and a fake prophet had Fumi incised severally on her body. They held a notion that Fumi was an Ogbanj and that was the reason why she was always in crisis, because her spiritual group wanted to take her away. Times, they even beat her up, all in the name of deliverance. Fumi was sobbing when she told me in school, on our day of resumption. I was full of vexation. I was thinking I must do something, but clearly, there was nothing I could do. I then asked about her mom's family, if she could go live with them. She shook her head and said no. She told me her mom had none. Because she was an orphan, she got married at the orphanage. My spirit drooped. Life had taken different tolls on her. Her mom was an orphan. She died and left her vulnerable to the wickedness of the world. It was the most tragic story I ever had. I just kept on comforting her and I also promised I would always be there for her. At the end of that session, I was called up for service. Fumi wasn't listed for youth service. Because she had problems in some courses, her health had caused her another setback. She was lugubrious not only by not going for service, but also by her stepmother's inhumane attitude towards her. She had absolutely been neglecting Funmi at that time. Every time she had a crisis, she would lock her up in her room. Funmi would roll in pains until I came to her rescue. She was pensive about my going. I just kept encouraging her that God would come to her aid. 2 days before my departure, I got a distress text from Funmi. It read, "Please help me." She had sent it probably at midnight, but I didn't see it until morning. I left Ikeja hurriedly that morning without having my bath. Traffic was terrible that morning on the island. I didn't get to Funmi's place until after 4 hours. I banged at the gate impatiently until her stepmother finally opened up the gate. She was obviously just waking up from bed. She wanted to accost me for intruding rudely, but I didn't care. I just dashed off to Funmi's room. She was in serious pain. She was lying still, trying to hold up the pains. I carried her immediately into the waiting cab outside. "Oh no. I am in pains," she wailed. "I don't know why this is happening to me." Her body was steaming and her eyes were red. She moved restlessly on my laps and she was bringing out whitish substance from her mouth. I stroked my hand all over her body to soothe her. It didn't help a bit. She just cried and rolled all through our journey to the hospital. A bed was wheeled out for us. It was done almost immediately. I guess her dad had called the hospital's management before we got there, since it was their family's hospital. I had called him earlier, on our way to the hospital. They took her to the emergency room, where they gave her an injection and took a sample of her blood. The pain subsided for some time, so they moved her to Ward 208. By the time they set her drip, she was crying in pain again. Legs were shaky and her breathing was heavy, so they connected her to a life support machine. They later told me to leave for the reception, so that they could run more tests on her. It was at the reception her father called again, to ask after her well-being and if the stepmother had arrived. I told him she was getting better, and her stepmother must be on her way. The result from the lab revealed that WBC had skyrocketed over 50,000, so she had infections, which explained the whitish substance. Temperature was high, because she also had malaria. I later went into the room to stay with her. Although she was still in pains, she was a bit calm at that time. She was napping when I got in. I was trying to cover her legs with the bedsheet, when she woke up from her sleep. "Sorry, how are you doing?" I queried. "Better, thank you." She twisted a little. She was about to turn back to her previous position, when she screamed again. Pains had come back bigger. It totally consumed her. I was about to press the bell when she held my hand. Thank you for all the love." And she closed her eyes finally. Doctor. I shouted and the doctor came running into the ward. They ushered me out of the room. My ears were deaf to the word. I could only hear the clock ticks, if it would only tick on for her. "I am sorry, we lost her," the doctor said wistfully, as he plodded out of the ward hopelessly. My eyes were filled with tears. I was unconscious of my surroundings. It was the wailing of her stepmother that stirred me back to life. I hissed at her hypocrisy and walked away, down the stairs and out of the hospital, brooding about Funmi's lifespan that had been filled with tragedies. She was like a candle battered by winds of life. Now it had blown her away finally. Certainly, my life would never be the same again. I would roam the world in the absence of my only love, Olufemileo, who will forever remain in the bosom of my heart.
It could have been the happiest moment of my life, but rather, my life had been plunged into lachrymos. My conscience had held me responsible constantly for my deeds. I wondered if I would be freed from the fetters of guilt. Every dawn of the day, I was being tortured by my conscience. It had filled me with excruciating pain. For what I had done was beyond pardon. I just hoped God would have mercy on my soul. Like every girl, I had the picture of my ideal guy at heart. I would say TDH is my kind of guy, at any chance of flaunting. TDH was my acronym for tall, dark and handsome. He should also be suave and rich, for my needs are limitless. Far and wide, life had been less rewarding about my wish for my husband, though handsome, but not dark and wealthy. In the past, I had had something to cherish. Louis, my first lover, had all those attributes I wanted in a guy. Louis was a hunk. He would always call me, watch me make my hair, shower me with gifts, and would make love to me passionately. His love built a wall, high, in my heart that no man could penetrate. Those 5 years we dated were the most memorable moments in my life. Tragedy struck after my youth service. Lewis lost his life in a motor accident. He was a motivational speaker. He was on his way to Abuja for a presentation when he met his Waterloo. That was a sad moment in my life. My lover had been taken away by the cold hands of death. I shed tears for several days. I discovered I was pregnant 3 months later. I evacuated it because I couldn't bear having a fatherless child. I moved on with my life. I dated several guys after Lewis, but they were all gold diggers. All they wanted was my luscious bosom, butt, or other features that were sexually appealing to them. They would rather have me at a nightstand, rather than take me down the aisle for a long-lasting commitment. There were no real men out there for me. I missed my Lewis. I missed the only guy that had ever treated me like a queen. I was anxious for marriage. At 29, age wasn't really on my side. My desperation pushed me closer to God. If men had failed me, God would never fail me. In my church, I joined the choir, where I functioned actively. My service to God finally paid off. The pastor in my church, Pastor David Abba, proposed to me. David was a fair-complexioned man in his 40s. He hailed from Kogi State, where I also came from. At that period, I had a lot of suitors coming for me, but my mind was made up on David. He was the only man that could give me peace of mind. Other guys could be philandering, but not David. He wouldn't, because he had sworn allegiance to God. Though mom and dad whined about his age, I insisted on him, telling them that age had nothing to do with love. After 4 months of courtship, we had a colorful wedding. Marital life wasn't easy with David. He had other commitments than me. He wasn't always at home. He was always in church attending to people's spiritual problems, or at the overseer's office, assisting. Aside from the respect accorded to me as Pastor Mrs. Abba, which I didn't really fancy, there was nothing beneficial again. As a woman, I needed all the love and caressing from my husband, but he was too spiritual for my liking. The most annoying thing about him was his attitude of not picking up calls. He would always make an excuse of being busy every time I accused him. 2 years into our marriage, we were still childless. Our parents had begun to worry. My parents had even started doubting my husband's potency. They supposed he was impotent, and that had kept him at bay from women all those years he was unmarried. But they couldn't explain why he finally tied the knot with me. I also had my fears. Reminiscence of my abortion in the past dominated my thoughts. That made me more committed and prayerful to God. The misery was revealed when I stumbled on David's medical report while I was doing my cleaning chores. My parents were right about their suspicion. David had a low sperm count. My heart was burdened with anguish and anger, for David was a charade. How could he have kept such a secret from me? No wonder he would always say, God is in control, no shaking, anytime I suggested we sought medical help. When he got back that night, we had a tirade. I had invectives in my words. He had hurt me badly for not confiding in me. He pacified me apologetically and also confessed that he had lived a rough life in the past before he became born again. That had resulted in his predicament. But now, things had changed. God had cured him. I asked if there were medical reports to support that, but he replied, sermonizing, saying God had spoken through different men of God concerning his cure. He had no reason to doubt God, though it sounded ridiculous, but for the sake of God, I just had to believe. As a wife, I tried to be supportive, especially in the issue of low sperm count. I believed, lamely, by continual intercourse, we would make it count. I would always make sure his daily needs were taken care of, made sure he had good meals, so that he would be ready psychologically for his manly duties at night. Instead, he felt continual coercion was condemnable. He mostly restrained from having sex with me. David complained that my high sexual demand was an act of desperation. We should just allow God to have his way. I felt disgusting. I felt like a cheap slut begging for sex in the presence of my husband. I was really desperate. Why shouldn't I be desperate? My mates had children, and I should have mine too. Peter was living with us later that year. He was the relative of a pastor who served in the same denomination as David. Pastor Joshua was transferred out of Lagos, but he wanted Peter to stay back. For Peter was an applicant and there were more opportunities in Lagos for his kind of job, estate management. David accepted him because he was a brother in Christ. He had a room farther from ours, out of our 3-bedroom bungalow in Soralia. I also needed a distraction from my problems, so I sought David's indulgence about a job. He granted it reluctantly. Peter and I were applicants. Our quest for a job made us cordial. We roamed the streets of Lagos together, in each other's company, often to the cafe to apply for jobs. I was fond of Peter because he was respectful, kind, and considerate. He was a fair lanky guy, more or less a sissy. He knew absolutely how to take care of a lady. I was crushing on him, but I had to look the other way because I was married. I was home alone on Friday, June 26, 2022. Dinner was ready, but David wasn't back from church. Peter had also traveled for a week. I called my husband, but he didn't pick his calls as usual. He later sent me a message reminding me about their video, so he wouldn't be coming back that night. I was disappointed over the food I had cooked. I stored it off in the freezer. I whiled away time by watching TV. Eco Disco took the light. I had to retire early to bed. I had my bath and dressed in my nightgown. I went straight to bed. Boom. Boom. I heard from my bed. It was pew-pew shots. It sounded continually. Certainly, there was a robbery going down somewhere in my area. I took cover under my bed, not really sure where the shots were coming from, but it sounded as if it were far away. Nevertheless, danger was lacking, and nobody was around to rescue me. My heart feared. In the midst of my fears, I heard someone knocking on my door. It came on and on, but I didn't answer. Until I heard a voice calling out my name. I realized it was Peter. I hurriedly unbolted the door at the sitting room for him. Seeing him that night eased the tension on my mind. I didn't even bother to ask about his journey, or how he got there without harm. I just hugged him passionately, for coming to my rescue, at my time of trouble. I clung onto him closely, forgetting my nightie was fluffy, and he could feel the sensation of my bosom, as if they were bare. He was nervous. I could hear his heart pounding erratically, but he couldn't free himself from me. When I finally parted from him, he heaved a sigh of relief. We greeted and I queried about his late arrival. He told me he got a text, late that evening, that he would be having an interview on Monday, so he came right away to prepare. I warmed the food I had kept in the freezer for him to eat. The earlier pew-pew shots had stopped. He was about to leave for his room, after his meal, when I begged him to stay with me, because I was still frightened. He obliged without hesitation. We conversed about different issues, which I wasn't particularly interested in. My mind was on our earlier encounter. When I hugged him, I was attracted to him seductively. The smell and the sensation from his body were impulsive. It wasn't the first time I felt that way in his presence. I had just been holding back my feelings. Moreover, David had been starving me. He hadn't made love to me in 30 days because he was fasting. At that time, my desperation was out of bounds. I stared at Peter lustfully, wanting him to quench the fire in my body. I couldn't hold back myself again. I moved closer and kissed him, on the couch, where he was seated. He was stunned and wanted to talk. I sealed his mouth with the tip of my finger. I held his hands and placed them on my bosom, on my waist and backside. I allowed him to explore all the sensual parts of my body. He was turned on. He reciprocated passionately by grabbing my bosom and began to fondle them. He kissed and caressed me, while I moaned in euphoria. Peter had already stripped off my dress, so that he could have full access to my womanhood. I was still battling with his buttons. He wouldn't allow me to unbutton them, for he was just all over me. I was still on it, when I heard, bam. David smashed a bottle on Peter's head, and Peter collapsed. David had got in unnoticeably. While we were engaged in our sexual synergy, he had a spare key of his own. "What nonsense is this in my house?" he shouted angrily. He pounced on Peter again, who was still bleeding and lying helplessly on the floor. He flung him towards the entrance door. He lunged towards him, I held his leg, and he turned back. David, please, I pleaded pitifully. While he was still glaring at me, Peter had a chance to escape. David kicked me off and walked inside, without uttering another word again. I lay on the floor, soberly, remorseful of all that had happened, while Peter was at large all through the night. Peter bled to his demise, the next day, in the hospital. My husband couldn't hold the guilt of ending his life, he turned himself into the police. He was charged with manslaughter and was sentenced to 15 years in imprisonment. I had ruined the lives of 2 men with my sluttish act. I couldn't go back to my parents, because of my inglorious deeds. I had refuge in my village in Kogi State. My pain became unbearable when I found out I was pregnant with David's baby. If I had known, I would have waited for God's time. He was truly a great God, oh God. Have mercy on my sinful soul. Once upon a time, in a small village located between rolling hills and swaying palm trees, there lived a person named Timmy. Timmy had a perpetual frown etched on his face, as if he was carrying the weight of the whole world on his shoulder. He was always grumbling about one thing or the other, spreading gloom like a walking dark cloud. Word of Timmy's perpetual unhappiness reached the ears of Pastor Ode, the jovial Nigerian pastor of the village church. Timmy attends Pastor Ade's church, so Pastor Ode decided to pay Timmy a visit to help with his predicament. My dear friend Timmy, why do you wear such a sour expression on your face? Asked Pastor Ode, his loud voice echoing through Timmy's humble abode. Timmy shrugged, unable to articulate the heaviness in his heart. Pastor Ode beckoned at Timmy. Come, sit with me, and let me tell you a story. Timmy obliged, curious about what the pastor had to say. Once upon a time, there was a man who went to see a wise old sage, complaining about how unhappy he was. The sage listened patiently, then offered the man a spoon filled with oil and instructed him to walk around the village without spilling a drop. Timmy's eyebrows shot up in surprise. But that's impossible. The oil would spill everywhere. Exactly, nodded Pastor Ade. The man walked around, so afraid of spilling the oil that he didn't enjoy the beauty of the village around him. When he returned to the sage, he admitted his failure. But the sage smiled and said, "Did you notice the beautiful flowers, the laughter of children, and the warmth of the sun?" Timmy pondered this for a moment. A hint of understanding was seen in his countenance. The moral of the story, continued Pastor Ode, is that sometimes we focus so much on what could go wrong that we forget to appreciate the blessings around us. Happiness isn't found in perfection but in gratitude and joy for the little things. Timmy's lips twitched, the beginnings of a smile forming. From that day on, Timmy made a conscious effort to see the world through grateful eyes. He laughed more, complained less, and found happiness in the simple pleasures of life, just like the flowers swaying in the breeze and the laughter that echoed through the village. And so, dear friends, let us remember the wisdom of Pastor Ade's tale. Happiness is not a destination to be reached but a journey to be embraced with open arms and a grateful heart.
In the bustling market of Lagos, vendors shouted their prices and customers haggled over deals. Ade, a struggling vendor, sold fruits from a small wooden cart. Despite his hardship, he always had a smile for his customers. One hot afternoon, Ode noticed a starving child staring at his mangoes. The child's eyes were wide with hunger. Without hesitation, Ode handed over his last, juicy mango to the child. The boy's mother, who had been searching frantically, found them just as the boy took a bite. Grateful tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what this means to us." The next day, the woman returned, but this time in a sleek car. She was not just any mother, but a wealthy philanthropist. She had seen Ade's kindness and wanted to repay him. "Come with me," she said, leading Ode to an empty shop nearby. "You have a big heart, Ode. Let me help you." With her support, Ode set up a proper fruit shop. His business flourished, and he never forgot the lesson he learned: kindness can open unexpected doors.
In a small rural village in Kaduna, there lived a young girl named Amina. She had big dreams of going to school and becoming a teacher, but her family was very poor and couldn't afford the school fees. Every day, Amina helped her mother in the farm and sold yams at the market, always with a smile and a kind word for everyone. One sunny afternoon, while walking back from the market, Amina saw something shiny on the ground. It was a purse, and inside it was full of money. Her heart raced. With this money, she could finally go to school. But Amina remembered what her parents had taught her about honesty. She knew the right thing to do. Amina asked around the village if anyone had lost a purse. Finally, she found an old woman who was frantic and in tears. The purse belonged to her. Amina handed it over without hesitation. The old woman was so grateful that she hugged Amina tightly. The next day, the old woman visited Amina's home. She was not just any old woman, but Hajia Zainab, a well-known businesswoman that owns chains of supermarkets in the city. Touched by Amina's honesty, Hajia Zainab offered to pay for Amina's education. Amina couldn't believe her luck. From that day on, Amina went to school and studied hard. She knew that honesty had brought her this incredible opportunity in life. Tolu slumped in his chair, staring out the window at the Lagos rain blurring the street below. Everything felt heavy, like a pot of egusi soup sitting in his chest. Across from him, Dr. Emeka, a friendly psychologist with a kind smile, sipped his tea. Tolu, Dr. Emeka began gently, you seem like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. What's on your mind? Tolu mumbled about feeling down, like there was no point to anything. Everything I liked does not appeal to me anymore. Dr. Emeka chuckled softly. Oh, that sounds like a bad case of life don't tire me blues, he said. But listen, even the strongest palm tree sways in the wind. It's okay not to feel okay sometimes. Tolu looked surprised. Really? Dr. Emeka nodded. Yes, really. But just like a palm tree weathers the storm, you can too. Tell me, Tolu, what things used to bring you joy before these feelings came? Tolu thought for a moment. I used to love playing football with my friends, he admitted shyly. Excellent. Dr. Emeka beamed. Maybe those storm clouds will reduce when you play football again. Even small joys can light a fire in the darkest of nights. By the end of their talk, a flicker of hope sparkled in Tolu's eyes. He realized that depression didn't have to define him. It was a cloud, yes, but there was still sunshine above it. Next day, Tolu laced up his boots and headed to the pitch. As he ran alongside his friends, laughter bubbling in his chest, he knew Dr. Emeka was right. Sometimes, all it takes is a little movement to chase away the rain clouds. Message: depression is a heavy weight to carry, but you don't have to carry it alone. Seek help, find your light, and remember, even the darkest night eventually gives way to dawn.
People used to call him Mr. Invisible. It was not because no one could see him. It was because no one noticed him. For years, I can walk through life like a ghost. His head always down, eyes fixed on the ground, doubting his every move. He had talent, yes, but never believed it himself. And when you do not believe in yourself, the world does not either. One evening, after yet another failed job interview, I sat on a park bench, staring at the sunset. His mind was heavy with thoughts of how life had been so unfair to him. Maybe I'm just not meant for success, he thought. Just then, an old man approached and sat beside him. You look like you have lost something, the old man said with a calm smile. Yeah, my dignity, I muttered. No matter how hard I try, I always feel I am tired of people looking down on me. The old man chuckled softly. Nobody will look up to a man who looks down on himself, son. Akin looked up, startled by the old man's words. Struck deep. What do you mean? Life Life is not about waiting for others to see your worth. It is about seeing it yourself first. If you keep walking like you are defeated, people will believe you are. The old man explained, his eyes glittering with wisdom. Stand tall, even when the weight of the world feels heavy. Akin felt the strange warmth in his chest. He thanked the old man and left the park, those words echoing in his mind. For the first time, he stood in front of a mirror, squared his shoulders, and lifted his head. Something changed that day, a shift in his posture, a spark of belief in his own potential. Months passed, and Akin walked into a new job interview. But this time, there was no fear in his eyes, no doubt in his step. He spoke with confidence, smiled more, and showed them what he was capable of. By the end of the interview, the panel was impressed, not just by his skills, but by the energy he radiated. He got the job. The old man who spoke to him was not just a random stranger. He was the CEO of a company Akin had been rejected from earlier. He had seen something in Akin that day in the park, and he wanted to test if Akin could see it in himself. As Akin walked out of the building that day, he realized something profound. Self-belief is not about proving others wrong. It is about proving yourself right. If you keep doubting yourself, waiting for others to believe in you, you will wait forever. Stand tall. Lift your head. How can anyone see greatness in you if you keep hiding it? Believe in your own worth, and the world will start to believe too.
Once upon a time in a small village, two friends, Ada and Bola, were known for their talents. Ada was a brilliant singer, while Bola excelled in painting. They were admired and loved by all. One day, a grand competition was announced to find the village's most talented individual. Ada and Bola, driven by the desire to outshine each other, practiced tirelessly. As the competition neared, their friendship turned into rivalry. On the day of the competition, Ada sang her heart out, and Bola showcased a breathtaking painting. Both were exceptional, and the crowd was torn. However, during the final round, something unexpected happened. Ada's voice faltered, and Bola's hands trembled. The pressure and their desire to prove superiority had taken its toll. In the end, neither won. The judge, an old wise man, said, "In trying to prove that we are better than each other, we lose the very essence of our humanity." Moved by his words, Ada and Bola realized their mistake. They embraced, vowing to support each other from then on. Let us remember to cherish our humanity and uplift one another. Only together can we truly thrive.
The bombs fell as Amira clutched her children close, her husband Ahmed leading them through chaos. They fled their homeland, hearts heavy with loss. Days blurred into weeks as they journeyed, hunger and thirst constant companions. At the border, exhausted and afraid, they met Sarah, a volunteer. Her gentle smile spoke volumes as she offered water, food, and blankets. "Welcome," she said, her eyes brimming with compassion. Sarah's church community embraced the family, providing shelter and support. As Amira watched her children play safely for the first time in months, she wept with gratitude. Ahmed found work, and slowly, they rebuilt their lives. The strangers became family, their love a reflection of God's grace. Years later, Amira volunteered at the same border, extending her hand to new arrivals. "I was once where you are," she said, her voice filled with empathy. "God brought us here through the kindness of others. Now, it's our turn to share His love." What can you do today to welcome the stranger, to be the hands and feet of Christ? Remember, in serving others, we serve Him.
Sarah had always dreamed of fame and fortune. From her small town, the glittering lights of Hollywood seemed like a beacon of hope. Every night, she'd gaze at the stars, imagining her name in lights. One day, an opportunity arose. A talent scout offered her a chance to audition in Los Angeles. Without hesitation, Sarah packed her bags and left everything behind. The city was a whirlwind of excitement. Sarah felt alive, surrounded by the glamour she'd always craved. Her audition went well, and she was offered a small role in an upcoming film. But as days turned into weeks, the shine began to fade. Long hours, cutthroat competition, and loneliness took their toll. The dream she had cherished from afar now felt hollow up close. Sitting alone in her tiny apartment, Sarah remembered a Zulu proverb her grandmother often quoted: "The lion is a beautiful animal when seen at a distance." She realized the wisdom in those words. The life she had idealized from afar was not what she truly needed or wanted. Sarah made a difficult decision. She returned home, where she found fulfillment in teaching drama to local children, sharing her passion in a way that enriched her community. Her experience taught her that true happiness often lies closer than we think, if only we open our eyes to see it. What dreams have you admired from afar? Take a moment to reflect on what truly brings you joy and fulfillment. Share your insights in the comments below. Your story might just inspire someone else to find their own path to happiness.